Welcome everyone. Thank you for showing up in our session. This is GRC203, Managing Security with a Unified Strategy featuring Nubank. Today we're going to have Nubank guys presenting here with us and sharing their story, their challenges. So this is our agenda. I will start with some introductions, then I will talk about security and regulatory challenges of the financial service industry, or FSI. Then Dave will talk about the Nubank history, Nubank challenges. After him, Thiago will present how Nubank implement the multi-organization strategy to tackle the Nubank challenges. Then we are going to close with some outcomes and lessons learned. Introducing AWS side, which is me. I am Ricardo Marques, Senior Solutions Architect from DNB FSI segment. I'm a dedicated solutions architect to Nubank account. I have just Nubank as customer in AWS. I have more than 16 years of experience with IT or technology. 14 years working in financial institutions with financial services. In the last 5 years, I have been working with AWS services, implementing different AWS solutions with different customers. Please, Dave, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ricardo. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Hannigan. I'm the CISO at Nubank. I've been doing this now for 24 years. I hate seeing that out there. About 12 years of specific cloud experience. And since we're new, we decided to throw something personal in there. I'm a plane enthusiast. I absolutely love airplanes ever since I was a little kid. And so I've flown on every commercial airplane that's been out since I've been alive. And my biggest regret there is I never flew the Concorde. And so that makes me very sad. Thiago.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So I'm Thiago. I'm the lead software engineer for cloud security at Nubank. I have more than 10 years of experience with technology, 8 years working with information security, and 4 years experience losing winnable chess hand games. Probably more than 5.
All right, so thank you guys. Now they are seated there, and I will take this first section with you. But before we jump in the first section, it talk about the security challenges in the FSI. Let's take a look at this challenge here. Imagine that all of you are parents of 3 kids, each one with a specific characteristics, behaviors, wills. They are brothers, but as we can see, they are different. One of them like to fight karate, another like to play video game, another like to play soccer. So the challenge here is how we or you as a parent can ensure that you grow, develop themselves, having fun, but safe, without being at a risk. So how can you ensure that you give the same education for the 3, but respecting each characteristic, and don't let them get a broken bone or get a virus or be at risk. So this is a huge challenge for parents. The question is, what strategy you are as a parent can adopt to raise your kids, respecting their characteristics, giving them autonomy and freedom, which is very important to grow, but without putting them at risk. So this is a huge challenge. And today you are going to see how Nubank did that, how Nubank raised their kids in 3 different countries and became the financial institution with more than 100 million customers nowadays. But before we learn the Nubank history, let's take a look at the security and regulatory challenges of financial service industry. For any company that wants to operate in the FSI, they will face a range of similar issues. For example, constantly regulations that are principle-based regulatory requirements, which leads to an uncertainty about regulatory expectations. So the company doesn't know whether they are doing the things right or wrong. Requirements that vary or change a lot across regions, across countries. The heavy focus on technical controls, so the company needs to be prepared technically. The security threat landscape, which is very dynamic. Every day comes up new issues that the security teams need to face, need to tackle, and limited cloud security and compliance specialists. Besides these issues, a huge challenge is deal with different regulators. So imagine a company that wants to operate across different countries. I brought these 3 countries here just to leverage the countries where Nubank operates today, because they will talk more about later. So if you want to operate, for example, in Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia, you need to deal with 80 different regulators. So you can imagine how many regulations 8 different regulators can create. A lot. So it's a huge challenge. Looking at some regulations, I brought some examples here. We're gonna have some that are global, such as SOC and PCI DGS. So they tend to work the same way in any country that you are operating. But each country will have its specific regulation. Some examples. In Mexico, just Mexican people can have access to data from Mexican customers. So if your company, for example, is operating in Brazil and Mexico, your employees from Brazil cannot access the data from the customer in Mexico. So you need to have policies and controls to avoid that. Another example, in Mexico, the backup data needs to stay within the Mexican territory. So if you want to implement a disaster recovery strategy, putting your backup data in another country, you will face difficulty to do that. Coming to Brazil, Brazil has regulations for whom that want to start operating the FSI. The company needs to present an organizational business contingency plan that needs to be approved by the central bank. And once approved, this business contingency plan, you receive a level of operational risk. It depends on the operational risk. The company will have less or more money to operate. So the company needs to have a good business contingency plan in order to have more money to operate. So that's a constraint, only in Brazil. In Brazil, talking about data privacy. In many countries, which rules data privacy is the GDPR. But in Brazil, we have LGPD. That is a kind of customized GDPR. So when you are operating in Brazil and in Mexico, Colombia, you need to treat the data privacy differently in Brazil than the other countries. For regulators, there is no distinction between security in the cloud and off the cloud. For regulators, the company is responsible for both. So the company is responsible for have a good cloud strategy, which is aligned with the business strategy, have a good cloud governance aligned with the cloud, aligning the cloud usage with the operational risks of the company, needs to have a good cloud operations and cloud architecture, ensuring that any cloud workload will be deployed and will be operated following the best practices. For example, following the AWS well-architected framework. And the company is also responsible for AWS service. Why? Because for regulators, the company is also responsible for their third parties, their suppliers, and AWS is one of them. So, besides that, companies need to be prepared to respond to a bunch of different sources of requirements and needs to be prepared to respond different stakeholders. For example, regulators, board of directors, and auditors. So you can see in just one slide how many challenges and aspects a company needs to be prepared to operating in the FSI. And for helping with that, AWS has, for example, the shared responsibility model. Even though for regulators there is no distinction between security in the cloud and off the cloud, AWS do have the shared responsibility model, which helps to relieve the customer operational burden, because AWS takes responsibility for the security of the cloud, which means security of the data centers, physical facilities, compute, storage, network, and customer will be responsible for the security in the cloud, in the cloud, which means security of their workloads, applications, customer data, identity and access management, configuration, and other things. So with this model, AWS helps to relieve the customer operational burden. Customer also inherit all these global security and compliance controls that AWS already has just for being using the AWS services. But even though inherent these global security and compliance controls, the customer still has an important role, which is ensure the security and compliance of their workloads, their applications. And to help customers with that, AWS has a wide range of services for security, management, and governance. We can see here in this slide all of them. They are all aligned with the security pillar of the architect framework. I grouped the services here by epics, just to make it easier to understand. So, for example, in the epic of identity and access management, we have services like AWS IAM, which helps you to control access to your account, to your services, to your workloads. We have services like AWS organizations that helps you to implement a policy-based management cross-account. Nubank will talk a lot about organizations in their challenges. In detection epic, you have, for example, Amazon Security Hub that gives you a central view of your security finds and automate your compliance controls. Nubank also will talk about. Talking about data protection, we have Macy. Macy is a machine learning based service that helps you to discover, classify, and protect your sensitive data automatically. Incident response, we have, for example, AWS Config and AWS Lambda. Together, you can easily implement an automation to automatically respond to an incident and apply a remediation, for example. And compliance governance, you can count on AWS Control Tower, which is the easiest way to implement a multi-account strategy in the AWS environment. So I talked a lot here, but I talked about few services. We have much more services here. So I know you may be wondering which service best fits to your necessity, your needs. Which service should you start to use? Which strategy should you adopt? So to help answer questions like that, AWS created the defense model. The defense model grouped some of the main services in three lines of defense. So we have the managed risk line, which has services like AWS Config, AWS Control, CloudTrail, AWS System Manager, which helps customers implement operational control for all of their cloud resources. In oversee risk line, you have services like Security Hub and CloudWatch, which helps you to have a comprehensive overview of your operational health and your security posture. And in the assurance of risk management line, you have services like AWS Audit Manager and AWS Artifact that helps you to easily assess your organizational policies, organizational procedures, activity, and also easily helps you to respond to regulators' questions, regulators' requirements. So bringing back the challenge that I presented in the beginning, with this model, you will easily ensure that your kids will grow in a safe and a controlled environment. We cannot forget the best practice. So working in a cloud environment, we need to have automation everywhere. And to facilitate this automation, AWS has AWS CloudFormation. That is the service that allows you to implement all of your infrastructure as a code. Implementing your infrastructure as a code, you can ensure that everything that goes to production, you go following the best practice and compliant with the regulators or your own company. If your company or team are more familiar with Terraform, you can also use Terraform. Terraform is highly integrated with the AWS service, so you can automate everything using Terraform as well. And closing this first session, I would like to give a simple example. How can we automate and ensure security and compliance with just 2 services? Let's take an example. I need to ensure that any S3 bucket containing PII data, you use server-side encryption with KMS. So how can you do that? I can first use CloudFormation. With CloudFormation, I will create a template for infrastructure as code, and in this template, I will configure the use of server-side encryption with KMS. CloudFormation also have a feature called CloudFormation Guard. With CloudFormation Guard, you can create detective controls and stop non-compliant resources to go to production. So if this bucket doesn't have the encryption, you can stop the deploy and the bucket will not be created. After production, you're gonna have the AWS Config. With Config, Config will continuously monitor, access, and register your resources, and also has detective controls. So, for example, if a bucket has the server-side encryption removed, AWS Config will alert you that, then you can create an automation, for example, using Lambda to apply a remediation and configure the KMS again. So with these 2 services, you will ensure that any resource in your environment, you go to production, following best practices and compliance, and with Config, you stay there following best practice and compliance. All right, so with that, I close my session. Now I would like to ask David to come here, talk about Nubank story and how they raise their kids.
Thanks, Ricardo. Hey everybody, so we're super excited to be here and honored to talk about what we're doing over at Nubank. And before we talk, Tiago's going to talk about the technical controls that we put in place, but before that, I want to make sure we level set a little bit on Nubank. Some of you may have heard of us, some of you may have not, so let's just start there and lay out. So who are we? What have we done? 2013, we started off in Brazil with a pretty big goal. And the goal was like, hey, can we go out there and simplify people's lives and empower them to make a difference, right? All in financial services. And we started with credit cards inside of Brazil. And we saw some great, amazing growth inside of Brazil. And we just keep adding cards and products. And so in 2019, we said, hey, this is working in Brazil. Latin America is similar. And there's a lot of opportunity to make a difference, not just in Brazil, but in other countries. And Mexico was the next place that we decided to launch. And then shortly after that, during the pandemic, we decided, hey, Colombia will be the 3rd place that we were going to start. And we really wanted to make sure that that happened. Stepping back, in the very beginning, we set this gigantic BHAG, audacious goal. And we said, we want to reach 100 million people. And proud to say that we actually did that last month, of getting 100 million customers onto our platform, which still baffles us. And now we're going there now, and we're going to challenge ourselves more. It's kind of like the history around what we've been doing. Remember what I said, though. We want to make sure that we are focused on giving back to our customers. And one of the ways that we can do that is to make sure that our costs are under control and that we're extremely focused on that. So we've done all of that. And you're going to see this little thing pop up in bubbles throughout the rest of the presentation. But our cost to serve, we're super focused on this as we're dealing with our customers, is 90 cents a month per customer. That enables us. Every penny that we save throughout cost goes back to our customers in terms of 0 fees or lower fees, about doing more research, doing more innovation for our customers so that their lives are easier and we can remove that complexity. Now look, there's the mission that we started out with: fight complexity, empower people. And these are the accolades. Right now, when we first started, nobody really knew who we were. 5 years, things kept picking up. And now you're seeing, hey, we're one of the top 5 most valuable brands in Brazil. We're the 4th largest financial institution in Latin America. Forbes named as one of the best banks in Brazil and Mexico. And we're still seen as the largest digital banking platform outside of outside of Asia, and I put fourth largest financial institution in Latin America again because we can't believe it, right? In a 10-year time period, the amount of work that's gone on and the growth inside of the company is absolutely amazing for us too. But we don't stop there. We have a saying inside of Nubank, and it's still day one for us. And we're going to stay focused on that. That's great. We love that we're getting the recognition, but we are still laser focused on our customers. And that's what our mission is, to make sure that we help them. So now you know a little bit about Nubank. Before Thiago gets up here and starts talking about the technical implementations that we did, I need to give you a level set, right? Understand the business challenges that we were facing, and remind you this is over a 10-year period, so starting in 2013, because as we go through some of the things that we've done, remember that if you just look back at AWS 10 years ago, just imagine how many services did not exist 10 years ago. Heck, just do 3 years of how many services didn't exist. We did. I mean, they announced, I think, at least 6 this particular conference. 6 things that I can recall were announced. So remember that as we go through this time period. So the challenges, what are they? Ricardo talked about them. If you look at the countries that we have business operations, where the financial services are, we can just look at them. He highlighted all the regulation that's out there. And if you take a step back, our business model is really simple. It's more countries and more products, right? And in each country, there's different regulators. And in each product, actually, there's another regulator for each product, right? Usually if there's a life insurance regulator, there's a banking regulator, sometimes there's a separate credit card. And so you can just see that the complexity around all of that is pretty daunting. And when you take a step back, you really have to think about, okay, you got these regulations. And remember, I told you that we got to 100 million customers last month. So as we were growing, we had to really say, how do we maintain rapid growth in a safe and controlled way? How do you do that? And to give you context, I want to just show you the graph, because it's easy to show you the last 100 million. But take a look at that. In 2020, we're just like right at the edge at 30 million customers. And over the last 3.5 years, we've taken that and tripled it to 100 million while adding 2 other countries. So think about the complexity from a technical level. How do you secure that? How do you operate that? It's really, really challenging, just to give you context around what we're going to show you from a technical basis. And again, all while focusing on making sure our costs don't grow. That is, just take a look at that, 90 cents, and it stays constant even as we're going from 80 million to 85 to 90 million customers to 100 million. We're keeping that number constant, because that's how we ensure we keep our customer at the forefront of everything that we're doing. But then the next question for us to ask ourselves is, after how do you keep all of that safe while keeping that growth going, is how do you manage globally and operate locally? And this is what Ricardo was talking about with those different regulators, with the different structures inside of a global organization. I'll give you some examples. So each country for us, we have a risk committee. But those risk committees only talk about the issues for that company, rightfully so. Mexico is focused on Mexico. Colombia is focused on Colombia, and Brazil, rightfully so, is focused on Brazil. Our regulators have the same point of view. They want to just only focus. Their responsibility is the country and the domain that they operate in. And so we have to be able to operate in that global mindset, while making sure we understand what the regulations are, what the expectations are, and then really thinking about how do we demonstrate that. And then the next step for us, as we go through, we take the next question is, look, if we have a global team, so we have here the 3 countries where the banking operations are, but we're more global than that. We have our engineers that are spread out. We are a remote forward company. So we have employees in the US, we have employees throughout Latin America, inside of Europe, all supporting our customers. So the other challenge is, how do you build a back-end infrastructure where you can support everybody and you can ensure the right controls, as Ricardo was talking about earlier, are actually in place, and then that we can demonstrate that, while, going back to the first one, having that crazy hyper growth and staying focused on the bottom line so that ultimately our customers benefit from us. Right? And The last part, this is what Thiago's going to spend a lot of time talking about, is, well, how do you then, I mean, the answer is technology, right? The answer is, how do you synchronize all of those technical controls in different areas? How do we enable our engineers to do the work that they need to build the products? How do we now allow our incident response teams to be able to work around every single country where there might be an issue? How do we think about global practices versus local practices? And specifically when it comes to managing the cloud infrastructure, how do we keep that secure? How do we operate that? And I won't steal any thunder from what Thiago is going to talk about, but it's really intriguing, and this will set up everything that he is. So, stepping back, the questions to keep on top of your mind as you hear what Thiago is going to talk about next is, we had to maintain a secure environment in a rapid growth time frame, and we still have that. How do we manage globally and operate locally? And then most importantly, how do we enable the technology so that represents how we work as a company, where our people are, and making that as easy as possible, because we believe complexity, even within our own environment, can cause issues for us. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Thiago, and he's going to talk in depth about how we can manage security globally in a multi-organizational strategy. All right, there you go.
Okay. Right. So, thanks, Dave. Hey, I'm going to try to answer some of the questions that Dave were making here. So, tell you all how we manage security in a multi-organization scenario, okay? So, let's start splitting things into parts. We come up with this strategy called No Prevent and Fix. This strategy was heavily inspired by Google's framework on how to deal with vulnerabilities in open source projects, right? And we took their approach and make our own, adjusting this strategy to the cloud, right? So for us, the no phase is understanding infrastructure, right? How many resources do you have? How many accounts do you have? How many organizations you have? What are the security problems that you have in infrastructure, right? How many misconfigurations do you have? Just gather as much data as possible on the infrastructure, right? This is the no phase for us. Today we're going to focus on one of the biggest part of the no phase that we use on a daily basis at Nubank. Prevent is, now that we know the problems that we have, how can we prevent them from keep growing, right? So we can stop the bleeding and make sure that the newly built infrastructure, every time that it's created a little bit more safe, okay? And the fixed part is how can we get rid of the problem, right, completely. So we prevent them from growing and we fix all the resources that have misconfigurations and problems like that. So we can actually solve problems and keep them solved, right? So when we start the no phase about 2 years ago, we were a small team. I think we were like 4 people, and we come across this. We had actually 5 organizations, 45 plus accounts, more than 7,000 resources, and these numbers keep growing every day, right? And I think the first question was why? Why use a multi-org scenario? Dave highlighted, as I'm going to highlight it right now, the Nubank cost to serve, right? This is to make sure that Nubank is really driven by efficiency, and having multiple organizations and having one financial institution for each country as a payer account of that country really help us to deal with regulators, right? Regulators are only interested in data and problems about that specific organization. So this really helps Nubank to respond to regulators faster, and also it's a big advantage to pay the infrastructure costs with the currency that we make in that country, right? So this is also a big thing for us. So, the most important services that we use in the no phase are the AWS Config and Security Hub. Config, we just to record every configuration changes that we have in infrastructure, help us to build a SMDB, things like that, and how to aggregate all the resources that we have. Security Hub uses Config to run the security checks on a daily basis, and it keeps getting new controls every day. So it's something that we really like to use. And today we're going to focus on a specific standard for Security Hub. That's AWS FSBP, right? That stands for Foundation Security Best Practice. So the idea is we have this multiple organization scenario. We have accounts. We're going to organize them in different organization units. This is just an example, right? But the idea is we're going to have a workloads organization unit. We can have like a production one, a staging one. We have a security one on the worldwide organization where it lives our security account. And the idea is to have this concept that we call a security baseline apply to these organizations and perform the actions that we need, okay? So the baseline is basically a set of guardrails that we want that happens on every account and region that we want, right? So the idea is after we apply the security baseline, we can adjust config, Security Hub, and other security services the way that we need them to be configured, right? And in the end, we actually want that our security accounts to be the admin of the security services. So the idea after the baseline is applied is to have a security account as the config aggregator, so we can carry for resource from across our whole infrastructure and across our whole multiple organizations on one single place, and also has the security account as our Security Hub admin, right? So we can have findings from the whole infrastructure in one place. So let's try to see in a little bit more detail what this actually look like in the development phase, right? So we're gonna have our baseline, right? You're going to deploy our Security Hub module, right? Security baseline is composed by multiple modules. This module is a Terraform module that we use to apply CloudFormation stack sets at the organization level, right? So when we started doing this work 2 years ago, CloudFormation support for Security Hub in specific was pretty much non-existent. So we had to use CloudFormation custom resources. And this is something that we really like to use and give us a lot of flexibility and granularity and things like that. So in order for that to work, we're actually going to need to deploy multiple CloudFormation stack sets, right? One is for a role that we're going to need our Lambda to use in every account. Right? This stack set for the role is applied only in one region, right? Because EIM is a global resource, right? We chose US East 1 as our global region for that. And the idea is that this stack set is going to be applied at the root level of the organization, so we can make sure that as soon as a new account enters this organization, this role will be automatically created, right? So, and the role only gives permission to handle Security Hub API, right? And we're going to need another CloudFormation stack set. This one is for CloudFormation custom resources, and this needs to be applied on organization units level, right? Because we try to use this different level of applications to make it easy how to deal with the dependency relationship between these things. And it needs to be applied on every region because Security Hub is a regional risk services, right? So every time that a custom resources is applied and is created, what that happens is CloudFormation calls our Lambda that stays on this control account and with the request type of create, and we need to know how to deal with that, right? This Lambda was built using Clojure, right? Anyone here already heard about Clojure? You can raise your hands. Oh, a few people, okay, that's nice. So Clojure is a programming language that Nubank owns. It's a functional programming language that runs on top of JVM, right? And I can talk a little about more of that in a bit. And the idea is to have to design this Lambda, since it is a CloudFormation custom resources. It needs to know how to respond to CloudFormation, right? In this scenario, we are responding to a create request type. We also need to know how to respond to an update request type, a delete request type, and things like that. And we also need to worry about being independency, right? So if we have many create calls, one after another, the final state will always be the desired state, right? So when we apply the custom resource stack set, when this request enters our Lambda, what we will do, we'll know from where CloudFormation is calling us, right? From which account and which region it is calling us. We're going to assume the role on that account and region, right? And we're going to handle Security Hub configuration. And at this step, it does a couple things, right? So the first thing that it does when it enters the account and this specific region is check if Security Hub is already enabled or not, right? If it isn't enabled, we enable it, right? And if it is already enabled, we need to check if we have another account that runs this particular account as administrator already, because this was like a taking over scenario for the Security Hub services and configuring things like that. So we need to worry about that. And if it does has another admin account, we need to dissociate it from it and to make sure that we're gonna be able to successfully set up our security account as the admin, right? So after it does that, we disable a few standards, security standards, because right now we're gonna focus only on the AWS Foundation Security Best Practice, right? We're also gonna disable a few controls that doesn't make sense to Nubank point of view, right? And we also disable controls that are related to global resources in every region except West East 1, that is our global region, right? After we did all that, we assume a role in the security account, and we register a new member account and ask an invite for that account to be administrated by us, right? We need to go back to that account and accept the invite. After all of this is done, right, if everything works as expected, we need to tell CloudFormation that, right? So we need to respond with a success in that case, and CloudFormation needs to know that the creation was successful, right? Remember that we are AWS resource in the end, right? So after all this is done, we're gonna have the security account as the admin for Security Hub on every accounting region that we have. And we can use aggregation region feature that Security Hub has to make sure that we have all the data centralized in one single place. We also chose West East 1 for that. So after we enable aggregation region, we can make sure that if we go to the security account in the West East 1 region, we're gonna see security findings from our whole infrastructure, right? And this configuration also propagates to other accounts. So if I can want to see how security findings from one specific org, one specific country, I just need to go to that account org in the West 1, East 1 region, right? So I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this control account, right? We decided to use a new account that lives actually outside these 5 organizations that we have, because we wanted to avoid like a chicken egg scenario, right? And the idea is this account is going to control our baselines and control everything that happens inside these 5 orgs. So in this account, we have built a pipeline to deploy Closure Lambdas. Closure isn't supported by default on AWS, so we need to use AWS Service Application Module and Docker containers to deploy Lambdas there, but it's pretty straightforward. And we need to deploy Lambdas on every region, right? Because since we are dealing with regional services, CloudFormation only calls Lambda on the same region that the stack set is being applied. So we need Lambdas on every region to be able to control that region, right? So besides the Lambda, we have the Terraform modules that apply CloudFormation stack sets on the organizational level, And this we have, it is a GitHub repository, right? We have workflows, code runners, we have baseline-oriented deployments and things like that. And this project started to grow inside the company, and we could enable other teams to build their own baselines, right? So we have a governance baseline, a CI/CD baseline, FinOps baseline, network baseline, and a lot more others are being born every day, right? So going back to the security baseline, right, that's our focus today. After we've done all of this, we have all this data on one single place from our whole presentation. So we do have our global view, right? And we also, to make sure that we can really take advantage of this data, we integrated that data with Nubank's internal ETL, right? So we can have a historical view of Security Hub data. That's something that is not supported by default also, right? And here is a sandbox metric, and you can see like the turning points after we start to act on this data, that the security controls that are passing surpass the security controls that are failing. This also happened on the production metrics, right? So this work that we did on the node phase really helps CloudSec team, right, to obtain some answers and to prioritize a few things. Things like which country do we need to focus on? Which country has more security problems? Which team has the highest number of misconfigurations, right? And do you have some automations that are provisioning resources incorrectly? So that's why it's always going to be born with a security flaw, right? And how can we prevent the security control from failing again? And focus on this last part, right? So prevent control from failing again. I'm going to enter the prevent phase of our strategy, right? To highlight how this works, I'm going to give a really simple and easy example from AWS Foundation Security Best Practice, right? A security control called EIM.7 is related to password policies for EIM users. The default configurations for that aren't considered secure enough, so we actually had 44 accounts that were failing the security control, and I'm going to show you how can we use the same mechanism that we built on the node phase to also prevent and to possibly fix things, right? So with that data in hands, we can create a strategy, right? In that case, it's pretty simple. We can create a custom password policy with strong configurations and apply that to our accounts. So using the same mechanism again, we have our security baseline. We have EIM.7 module. This is also something important, working with granular Terraform modules that do specific things. It's a lot easier and better than one big module that does a lot of things, believe me. And the idea is the same. We're going to apply CloudFormation stack sets, right? In that case, we also need to use a custom resource. And we're going to have one for the role that is applied on the root level and only in one region, and one for the custom resources that is going to trigger a Lambda on the security account, the Lambda on the control account, sorry. The Lambda control account will see from which account CloudFormation is calling us from, is going to assume the role on the corresponding account, is going to update the password policy, and if everything was successful, we're going to respond CloudFormation with success. So after all this process is done, we actually were able to solve the EIM.7 security control, right? We solved it, but we actually didn't handle the prevent, right? So to make sure that this control never fails again, we take advantage of service control policies, right? We can basically create a service control policy that prevents any user from updating the password policy that's not our Lambda, right? So this give us the assurance that the security control won't fail again. And another big part of the prevent phase is to protect the baseline that we build, to protect the node phase. So we can make sure that no one can disable Security Hub besides our Lambda. No one can try to delete our CloudFormation stack sets, try to update it, and perform any actions that we don't want them doing, right? And we also use the same project to apply service control policies across these 5 AWS organizations, right? So moving to the fix phase, in that case that I just showed you is the happy path. It doesn't happen very often, right? Cloud Security was able to identify, to prevent them from happening again, and to completely fix the problem, right? Our team is small, right? I think it grew a little bit. Now I think now we are 7 engineers instead of 4 at the beginning, and we can't do all by ourselves, right? We do have some security concerns and problems that if we just decided to solve them on our own, we can end up breaking things in production environments and causing a lot of problems to the company because it's impossible to have all the context necessary from our whole infrastructure, right? So one example is the RDS.2 security control that tells us if you have any public RDS instance in your cloud environment, this security control is one of many that we can actually prevent from happening, and we can actually force the fix. So we do have to rely on other teams. We have a good collaboration with the vulnerability management team inside Nubank, and we also have a pretty good relationship with our internal audit team. So they both use this data to find the owners and to help us to fix the problems and to increase our security posture across the cloud, right? But the most important part for me, everything isn't enough, right? We actually need to empower the service team, the product teams. They are the owners of the resources. They have the whole context and they know how to fix the problems. The main thing is in most cases, they don't know that the problem exists. So we didn't focus on increasing visibility for everyone, right? For the product teams. So they can answer these simple questions like, what is the security score of their solution, right? Which one of my resources are most affects that score, right? And this is actually working a lot. So we were able to grow our security score by ourselves and by the help of other teams to a point that is pretty okay. But to take the security score to the next level, we really need help from the product teams. And increasing this visibility, we built lots of dashboards on the data and give them to teams, to squads, to managers. And this is what's driving our security score to the next level, right? And kind of makes our security score organically grow across our infrastructure. So to summarize a few of the questions, so how to maintain a rapid growth in a safe and controlled way, we built a scalable and reliable solution, right? We could enable the teams to build their own baselines. So we are sure that every time a new account enters our organization is going to have the guardrails that we want that you have. How to manage globally and operate locally. We have a global view. We have a granular view. This solution is very customizable, very flexible, and we can generate customized reports for specific regulators from specific countries. We can adjust our solution in our data for whatever need that we have, right? And how to synchronize all the technical controls with different areas. We build a platform in the end, right? Platformization is key for company growth and success, and this platform really helps everyone to be in sync and everyone to work together, right? So I feel outcomes and lessons learned. Proper resource tagging is essential, right? Not only for security, it's also important for a financial management point of view. I just show you guys that we have a security score by squad, and this isn't possible if we don't have proper resource tagging in place, right? So this is something that we are continually improving and paying attention to it. Leadership dependencies are key to scalable and reliable solutions. I try to highlight this. It's really easy to build a platform that is scalable and is reliable if we have clear definition of the leadership dependencies between every moving part. In our case, the workflows, the CloudFormation stack sets, Terraform modules, and things like that. Ensure proper monitoring in complex system is always a challenge, right? In our case, we are using Lambdas, so it's a little easier to create custom alerts, but that's not always the case when we're using per CloudFormation, right? And the next one, extend AWS service capabilities, right? AWS has some great products and great security products, and Nubank really likes to, when we use something, we really use it, right? So let's extend AWS to its max so we can take the most of it and really enjoy the capabilities that they offer us, right? The same thing that we did with Clojure also. So we use Clojure for one thing, we're going to use Clojure for many things. AWS, we use it for one thing, we are going to really use AWS for a lot of things, right? So that's it for my part. I'm going to pass back to Ricardo. He's going to have a few more words.
Thank you, Thiago. So, all right. So, guys, we saw a lot of services here. I talked about some of them. Nubank talked how they use some of them. So now I would like to ask you to scan this QR code. This QR code will take you to the security, identity, and compliance page at AWS. There you will find much more detail about all of those services that I presented. And you also find some solutions and other things that may help you on your day-by-day, on your AWS usage. And that's it. Thank you, and enjoy the closing session.
Thanks, Sam. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.